Hi, today I'm joined by Julie from Apple Natural, who is doing exciting things in the world of natural snacks. Julie, welcome.
Thank you very much.
Julie, tell me, what is a fruit leather?
So, a fruit leather, the fruit leathers that we make an apple fruit leather. We have a heritage orchard, and from that, the apples are grown, picked, um, cooked, turned into a pulp, and then dehydrated literally as a flat piece of leather. So it looks like a sheet of leather. And when you turn it into a leather, what you're doing is taking out the water content. So it intensifies the flavor and the concentration of the apples. So hence why you would have a smaller amount than you would an actual apple because it's had the water element taken out of it. And the fruit leathers that we make, we use the skin of the apple as well. So it has that element of fibre in it as well. It can be confused with actual leather because some companies actually do use apple pulp as a byproduct and make it into leather for car upholstery, shoes. So it is becoming something in terms of waste that is being reused, but it's not something you can eat.
Okay. So that's really important. It's got the same level of fiber as you would get from eating a proper apple then.
It's got so some fruit leathers that exist now, they've obviously just used the puree. It's very clear in the consistency and the texture. So ours is a lot more grainy because, yeah, it does have some of the skin in it and it's cooked using the skin. And then you've got some of our flavors like sea buckthorn, where when we add the sea buckthorn, we're adding everything within the berry. So sea buckthorn is a really good plant-based source of omegas as well as vitamin C and lots of other things. And we use everything from that sea buckthorn. So we grind down all the seeds and everything. So with that comes a really grainy texture in the fruit leather. So that one is a standout one that is really quite fibery and quite intense in flavour. Sea buckthorn almost tastes citrusy. So it's a really nice combination. And that, yeah, has a definite grain to it. But yes, we use the skins. We don't just peel the apples and get rid of the skin. So we use the skins.
Yeah, because I know if you think about orange juice, for instance, you can probably drink the equivalent of 10 oranges quite easily just if you're drinking. But if you try eating oranges, you'd struggle to eat more than one and a half or two, maybe. Is that the case with the fruit leathers that you're making? Is there a limit to how much you can eat? Or is it
Well,
like
we reckon,
candy where you could just go
well,
forever?
yeah, I mean, so we sell in 20 grams, 40 grams, or you can buy bigger bags, but the bigger bags we would sell as a store cupboard item. So the 20-gram serving was worked out on the equivalent to a single apple. So all fruit contains sugar, but it's natural sugar. So your five a day, it shouldn't really be five portions of fruit. It should be predominantly vegetables because but even vegetables contain sugar as well, depending on your the vegetables that you're eating. I mean, greens, cabbage, which are now the superfood for this year, according to Vogue, are very low in sugar and are really good for you in a lot of respects. But some vegetables, I mean, tomatoes that we eat, which are actually a fruit, but they're quite high in sugar. And a lot of supermarket apples now are created to be high in sugar. So the little bright pink ones that are probably covered in chemicals and wax that have come from China that kids love, they're not great because when they bite into that skin, they're biting into all the chemical residue that exists within that apple. And it's been purposely grown to be incredibly sweet. And so it is high in sugar. So fruit is high in sugar. So you should always moderate how much fruit. So they're all in terms of the fruit leathers. We recommend a 20 grams serving as a serving. The same if you drink apple juice, you should only have I think it's a 200 ml serving. You know, you buy bottles of juice when you're out and they encourage you to drink the entire bottle, but that's more than one serving. So it's finding a balance in all the things that you eat in terms of your fruit and vegetable intake. So the more you eat, the more sugar, although it's natural sugar. So it's very different to having refined sugar with your unnatural spikes that come as a result of that.
Yeah, I think when you look at smoothies, supermarket smoothies. It's terrifying the amount of sugar in there and the lack of fiber. So there's really nothing there telling your body to stop having them. So the sweetness of apples is something that I'm very aware of because if I go and find an apple in the wild, like sometimes I'll go to Brogdale, I don't know if you know,
Yeah.
um, and you bite an old apple, it can be really sour, maybe even a bit bitter, and it's not definitely not nearly as sweet as the apples you get in the supermarket. So I suspect that the fruit we're given, not just the apples, but everything, has been created to be as sweet as possible, which I'm not really a fan of. And it makes me question whether the more sweetness you get used to through your fruit, the more sweetness you want in other things as well, like confectionery or chocolate or whatever.
Yeah, well, if you think about some traditional apples like Cox's, those kind of apples that we were brought up on and that's what we ate, they're not. They've got that sour flavor. And also apples change throughout the season. So the early apples, the first one being an apple called Discovery, which you'll never find in a supermarket, is super sweet, really nice, but doesn't store. And then in the West Country, we have one called early bower and pear apple, which is beautiful. It looks like a pear, but it's an apple. And it was originally used to make a female cider. And then as the seasons progress, the flavour changes in the apples. And then when you get the later apples that will store, like here you've got Cornish aromatic, Ashmead's kernel, they're ones that are a lot, and the ones they're a lot harsher in flavour. They haven't got that incredible sweetness. So yeah, we've forgotten we have so many apples that are UK apples, but you don't often see them in the supermarket. You see Pink Lady, Gala, those kind of ones that have been brought into the food system, but they're not native in this country in terms of the ones. The same you ultimately a cooking apple will become sweet over time. So an old traditional Bramley that in the past you would have cooked with loads of sugar, if you have a Bramley and you pick it and you store it, it will naturally become sweeter as it stores. And you can actually cook it without adding sugar. It's just about that palate and the flavors that I suppose we've now gotten used to because of supermarket produce.
Yeah, it's always surprised me because Bramley apples I've always been happy to eat just as they are, and I could never understand why they were called the cooking apple when I was yeah, happy to have it just as it is.
But
Um,
we are the only country in Europe that distinguishes. So most other countries, they're just apples. So they're not cooking and they're not dessert. They're just apples, and it's how you use them and how you deal with them. Because there are certain apples that are called dual purpose that basically when they're picked from the tree, they would be a cooker. But then if they're stored over time, they turn into a dessert apple because of the structure of the sugars over time. So we've lost that understanding
hmm.
and apple
I
itself.
recently read a book called The Apple, Sally Coulthard,
Okay.
and she was talking about how something like 80% of the apples grown in the UK, China, and various other countries are really the ones that you just mentioned there, like Gala, Pink Lady. Do you ever find yourself eating those, or would you
No,
not stoop so low?
no, never. And I would only, so my apples will store until February, and then I have a teenager who does like apples. So if I'm forced into a situation where I have to buy apples, I would only ever buy organic, and I wouldn't buy something that's come from New Zealand or South Africa. Not that a lot of those apples are organic, so you find quite often the Netherlands and places like that, they are organic. But yeah, historically apples don't store beyond March, really. Come March, you're getting, unless they're using unnatural means to store them,
Yeah.
which means they're refrigerated or they're gassed, which stops them from rotting. But it ultimately, sometimes you can get an apple and, like Granny Smiths used to have that real crunch to them, and sometimes you get them and they're really soft because they've been stored and so they've disintegrated over time and they don't have that freshness and that crispness anymore.
Yeah, I imagine that can't be good for nutrition.
No, because over time, it's like over time, the longer vegetables are kept, they lose their nutritional value. So it would be the same with something like an apple.
Yeah. And another thing the book mentioned was how we've got a history of importing apples that goes back at least to the 1800s, where the US used to supply a lot of our apples. But when I think of England, maybe even Britain, I think of an apple growing country. So do you not have any idea why we needed to import so many apples?
I think a lot of orchards, I think it's about production and costs, and I think it's about so all those apples have to be picked and the cost of labor. So to pick dessert apples is far more labor intensive and it's a careful process because you don't want to bruise the apple because although a bruise ultimately doesn't mean an apple's bad, if you have a bruised apple that's stored, it will turn the other apples around it bad. And people don't like an apple with a bruise on it. It's only just where the skin's been bashed and exposed to more chemicals in the atmosphere that it becomes brown, but it's not bad for you ultimately. So I think it's about the picking. I mean, traditional orchards, I mean, picking apples, it takes time and you need to be careful how you pick them. And so maybe that's the difference in this country, that it costs more to pick them than it does in some of those other countries. I mean, some commercial orchards, they intensively grow. I mean, the trees are all planted very close together. I mean, unlike cider apples where you can shake the tree because it doesn't matter if they're bruised. For cooking and dessert apples, they've got to be picked, and that takes time. And I think maybe also certain apples just don't. I mean, we were talking earlier about taste and flavor. I mean, maybe that's the thing is that people's palate has become used to a lot of these apples that we now import. And that's the demand for a sweeter apple rather than a traditional Cox or something like that that has that sharpness to it,
Mm, yeah.
um, and a more sophisticated flavor.
The, and I remember hearing somewhere that there's a lot of, they're called dwarf trees. And the idea is that the roots have been shortened or something. So the tree is much shorter. And that means that the trees can grow together much closer. But the weight of the fruit has to be supported because the tree can't support its own fruit, which just, it sounds like a horrible Frankenstein kind of situation. But do you know, is that common in?
Well, it's about rootstock. So you get three different types of rootstock. So you can get what you're referring to is the smaller rootstock, which traditionally is what you would put in a garden. Because if you got a big apple tree, which would be on M25 rootstock, I mean that could grow to 20 meters, and you've got the spread as well. So you've got to think not only is it growing up, but it's growing out. You put something like that in a garden, and most apples can't be solitary. They need other varieties to cross-pollinate. So in a regular garden, you would have to go with a smaller variety. And it's very common, therefore, you think of old traditional walled kitchen gardens, you would have them trained along the walls. It's very common with pears and apples and arches made. They have to be grown from the smaller rootstock or the mid rootstock, which is MM106, which would probably grow to about 4 to 6 meters and then spread. And then, but they would need to be planted 6 meters apart. And then also, depending on how you're growing, you need to leave a passage between them. So, in a commercial situation, they probably would be growing in tight lines where they have one avenue that they can go between the apples, but all the trees are close. And so it will ultimately inhibit their growth out because they're that close that they can't go out. But some varieties have bigger spread than others. I mean, we've got a huge range in our orchard, and some do just grow up, but some absolutely grow out. So they're all very different in terms of the apples, the shape, how they grow, the colour of the leaves, the blossom. They're they are all different in that respect.
Yeah. So how do you operate your orchard? Are they as natural as possible? And do you have to use different rootstock and
So
how does it
nearly
work?
all, we've got a few M25, but predominantly it's M106, so that they are contained in terms of height, because the bigger trees also, they take longer before they bear fruit. So it would be 7 years and beyond before they'd have their first apples. So we planted our first trees in 2016. So we have the fruit now on our more established trees. They're all grown 6 meters apart so that they have the chance for a 2 meter spread, a 2 meter avenue between, um, and then they have the height to grow. Because that's the thing as well, when it comes to trying to prune, the taller the trees, the more difficult they are to manage in that respect. So we are not organic, we're not certified organic because as a small producer, we can't afford to be, which is very common. So just because someone says to you they're not organic, it doesn't mean that they don't grow in a way that's agroecological, that's in tune with nature, that they don't use chemicals, pesticides, insecticides. They just choose not to be organic, either out of cost or because they're on a smaller scale. So there's still the provenance of the food. So I would say to anybody, if you're buying local, then that's always worth checking, because you don't get the organic stamp, but that doesn't mean that that's not organic. They just can't say they're organic because they've not got a soil association certification. But a lot of local growers grow agroecologically and they're very conscious of the environment, and with orchards, the biodiversity that exists, because a lot of orchards have gone over time, they've been ripped out, other things have gone in their place. And we are near the Tamar Valley, and the Tamar Valley historically had an abundance of fruit. So cherries, we've got a lot of Tamar Valley cherry varieties, but the cherry orchards have nearly all gone. There's only a couple that still exist that are original cherry orchards. So there's Burkham, Fice, I think Jan James is another one. So they're all different in size and flavour, but cherries are an incredibly labour intensive crop to pick.
Yeah, I guess because they're really soft, so you really have to be careful with.
They're really soft. You have to pick them with the stalks, really. If you pick them without the stalks, the fruit won't keep. And when you pick them, you've got to be careful of the fruit bud on the tree, because if you break the fruit bud, then that prevents a cherry growing there the following year. So, and ultimately they're high up and the birds love them. So
Yeah.
you need to have quite big trees with a lot of fruit in order to harvest and the birds not get there ahead of you.
Just going back to the organic thing that you were talking about, because I have thought for a while that organic, I think, is a great, it's a great concept, but at the same time, I don't think it necessarily means that something has to be nutritionally rich or even to taste good. So how would you find out if your apple is not organic, but actually has been well looked after and well grown?
By buying from a local producer or a local food hub. I don't think you'd know that in the soup. If the reality is an apple you buy in the supermarket isn't going to be, because producers that are sympathetic, unless they're stamped with organic, they're not going to be in a supermarket. So if you go to a local farm shop or a local food hub or a producer that is near to you, a farmer's market, any of those things, then businesses are really open and honest about how they grow, and they will tell you that. And that is the best means to buying better food. Box schemes that exist, they will tell you the detail of the food. They will tell you potentially about the grower and all that provenance that comes with it. So it is very easy to find out, but not within a supermarket.
Yeah, okay. So you need to have a conversation with the person growing it. I mean, that makes it, yeah, impossible to do in a supermarket, isn't it? I mean, you have to buy from a small producer.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't buy fruit and veg from a supermarket, so I don't know. I mean, it sometimes used to tell you who your grower, where you went through a phase, certain supermarkets used to tell you who the grower was. So I suppose if you were that diligent, you could look it up and find out for yourself. But who, when you're doing a supermarket shop, does that ultimately? You just picking up and filling up your trolley, aren't you?
Yeah. Yeah. Um, I mean, it sounds like you got incredible Apple knowledge, Julie, but what were you doing before? How did you get into this?
Um, so believe it or not, I lived in London and I used to work in the film, music, and theatre industry. And then we moved to Cornwall 23 years ago. We moved to the North Coast originally. We ran a business. We renovated a property. We had holiday cottages. And then we came to where we are now, which is sort of mid-east Cornwall. We had a lot of land where we are. It was a former council farm, and we decided after looking at old maps and seeing, so a lot of orchards were scrubbed at the turn of the century or during the war. So when we look back at old maps, we could see there were a lot of fruit trees that grew in this area and on our land. So we decided to replant. So that's how the orchard began. Um, I had a young son at the time and he loved snacking, which is very much the way it is with small children. That's what their bodies need, that's what they do. So don't, as a parent, ever feel bad that your small child wants to snack because that is their metabolism. That's how it works. They need small amounts of food on quite a regular basis. So it became something I did from experimenting. And to begin with, I worked with another orchard, some people in this area who are incredibly knowledgeable about heritage orchards and heritage apples, and they allowed me to pick from their trees. And so I started to experiment in my own kitchen in the house and make fruit leathers for him.
Okay, amazing. I mean, that is a serious turnaround of career, but I love that. How did you know that he was, or with your son, sorry, how do you find he is with fruit leathers? Is that satisfying for him, or does he need other confectionery and sweets?
So I have a son that has a very sweet tooth. So that is a modification that I try to do, but that's changed over time. I mean, I know from some of my customers, so you ask about some flavors, is you would think something like gooseberry, where we do a fruit leather that's a hint of gooseberry. That is a popular flavor with children as well as adults, whereas gooseberry as a fruit is very uncommon now in this country. Gooseberries and rhubarb we sometimes think as like grandma fruits because we remember, gooseberry crumble, rhubarb crumble that would have been made with copious amounts of sugar. But actually, when you mix the gooseberry with the apple, it turns into a fruit leather that is really naturally sweet because the two are a really good pairing. And when he was younger as well, he used to like the seaweed and the beetroot. So he'd like the colours as well as the contrast in flavours. So I think children's palates change over time, is we can mould them when they're younger in terms of what they eat. Although I do have some customers originally that they bought the fruit leathers because they couldn't get their children to eat fruit. So it would be something that would be a means of making them eat fruit once a day if they had a bag of fruit leathers. So that's not uncommon, but I think what happens with children over time, especially when they reach secondary school age, is they become influenced by their peers and other external things, whether that be, as much as we fight it, social media, school food is appalling. So the majority of school food doesn't encourage healthy eating. So, and they're being led every day when they're at school in terms of what they eat by what's available, and it's not always a great range of food, especially when they get to secondary school where they can make those choices themselves. At primary school, there's a menu and they have a choice within the menu, but they're not walking into a canteen and being offered, bacon baps, pizza slices, drinks that are not necessarily healthy, big slabs of cake, steel crisps, things that we would try to discourage our children to eat in, you know, um, all the time, but then it's still potentially part of their balanced diet. So I think that changes over time. So for him, what he eats now has changed over time. Like all children, they dip and, you know, dip and dive in terms of what they like, and their palate changes. Do they become more adventurous in terms of their food, like curries, spices? And it also is about, something we touched on early on. It's about what they are offered in their home situation, what you eat as a family at home. Do the parents cook? Do they offer them fresh fruit and vegetables? Do they, home cook meals? And sometimes, parents can be tight on time. So that's often the constraint that we work with as well, is that it's not necessarily they don't have the ability, they just don't have the time juggling busy lives.
Yeah. I think one of the ideas I really like about the fruit leather is you're really getting the full spectrum of flavor from that original ingredient. And I think if your palate is trained to enjoy real food, then you'll start to reject the ones that are synthetic or produced in a lab. So it's it's kind of like the fruit leather is a sneaky way of going in through the back door because it's sweet, and I would imagine sweet enough for kids to enjoy, um, and they probably don't realize that it's also training their palate to kind of drive them away from biscuits and sweets and that kind of thing.
Because there are supermarket fruit leathers that are full. If you do look on the packet, they are absolutely categorically, positioned for children, marketed to children, and they're not the natural. There are some that are fruit, but some that have a huge amount of other stuff added to them that make them a novelty product and make them really sweet.
Yeah. How do you uh, like when you look at those, are there any that are as good as what you're making, or are they all something to avoid?
I'd say they're different. I mean, there's brands that have been very successful that are very successful. I mean, all the Bear products, I mean, they're a great snack for kids. I mean, absolutely. And they're really clever with their marketing in terms of how they present them and the different shapes and colors. And early on, they were like interactive with, the cards in the packets. They're clever and they've become a really successful global brand. And as to how they make the product, whether they use the skins or not, I don't know. But obviously, they are creating a huge volume of product. So, I, whether it's all UK apples, potentially not, because it's how you sustain it all year round in order to just make such a high volume of product. We don't make a high volume of product and we dip down with the season. So now at this time of year, my stocks will start to get low until I have apples again, August, September. So
Mm.
depending on how much I've sold. And also we're influenced by the harvest and the season. So last year was a really good year for apples, although because of the dry weather, the juice levels were really low. So in terms of juicing apples, the volume of juice that you got for the weight is far lower than it had been in previous years because we'd had so little rain, and that ultimately influences the apple. It can become a lot drier, and then it started to rain across the course of the apple season, so the later varieties benefited from that, but the early varieties, and if you were picking things like Bramleys early, they were incredibly dry because they hadn't had any rain.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember some of the veg on sale last summer was tiny, like cauliflowers. It were kind of
Mm.
that kind of size. Um, with the fruit leathers, how did you find it when you were trying to sell to people in the beginning? Was it a product that they knew because of other brands, or was it completely new to them?
Completely. So when I first started by doing local markets, I mean, people did literally think it was a piece of leather. So yeah, absolutely. So that was a slight education in terms of that and in terms of what it was. So I started to begin with by always doing markets. So I had that interface with customers in terms of explaining what it was. And then when we packeted and started to sell through retail, which I've scaled back in that respect now. So my predominant sales are with Hodmedod's. And for me, that is a customer that understands the product and is conscientious in terms of the food that they eat and potentially, their health, beans and the ethos that they have and the products that they buy is shared with us. So therefore it sits. So we started working with them during COVID at a time when for a lot of small businesses, a lot of avenues shut in terms of um, where they could sell their produce, and then also what some businesses also added to that. So we became part of their guest producers. So, and we've continued to stock with them and sell with them since then. So we have some flavors that are more popular than others, and sometimes it changes, and um, it's adults and potentially children. I know from one person that I met once who was a buyer at a really massive, successful farm shop that she was buying them from Hobby Dodds for her child.
Mm.
And then I know adults that buy them as well. So it's not a product that's child specific. And it works really well as a snack that you might take to work with nuts. Um, the beetroot and the sea buckthorn and the seaweed are really nice in a salad, like at this time of year when you need to liven up a salad. Adding that to a salad is really nice. It makes it more colourful, it makes it tastier. And then the specific berry ones, raspberry and a black currant are true to the berry. So they have that tartness of flavour, which I really like, but it's raspberry and it's black currant. The gooseberry, although it's a tart berry, doesn't seem to have quite that same tartness to it. And then you get the strawberry, which has got the florals of the strawberry, and blackberry is blackberry. So they all are unique in terms of their flavors, and certain customers have their favorites. Like some people that do, they buy big bags with us and they specify the flavors that they want because they may have tried a cross section and then they decide that there's certain ones they prefer to others.
Hmm. Yeah. Um, I mean, that's making me salivate at all those flavors. I feel like I need to get some right now. Where do you want to take the business? Do you want to focus on fruit leathers and come out with new flavors, or have you got other plans?
So I like a lot of, it's me. And so I have my limitations in terms of what I can do, because I chose to make a product that is labor intensive. So it's all made by hand. So I grow the apples, which means I look after all the trees. We have over 300 trees, so I have an orchard that needs looking after. And then when they're ready, I pick the apples and then I wash the apples, I cook the apples, I turn them into fruit leathers, I package the apples and I send them out. So therefore I have my limitations. And what sometimes happens is when I've been approached in the past by really quite big companies and quite amazing brands that would be great to work with, but ultimately they want to buy at a level that I can't afford to make it for. So I'm
Mhm.
not a factory, it's me. And so I have to have a certain price in terms of covering the costs that are involved in both myself, electric, other elements, which I think is sometimes what doesn't always happen with small businesses. They're not always realistic in terms of, how much time, effort, and actual energy. And we're in a world where costs are going up. You know, businesses electric, yet again now it's dipped, but potentially it's going up again in the winter. So all those things are relevant in terms of making a product, storing a product, businesses that print your labels, the packets that you put the products in. I mean, our 40-gram bags, they're all home compostable. So that is a decision that I made, but that comes at a price. So that is a more expensive packet because I've
Mhm.
made that choice. I want it to be home compostable because sometimes things say they're compostable, but they're not compostable in a home situation. They're only compostable in a commercial situation.
Yeah, the whole packaging story is complex. It's
Mm.
complex. Julie, just to wrap up, what is your favorite flavor from the range?
Oh, so I'd say I have a mixture. So I do like the sea buckthorn because it's so different and it has that grain and it's the really unusual citrus and it's got the seeds in it, which in terms of the omegas and stuff are great. And I do like the blackcurrant and the raspberry for their zing, but the all-rounder, all apple is still just a great flavor. I mean, we've won lots of awards over the years and we won an award for the all apple as well as blackcurrant, raspberry, fennel, and so all apple, raspberry, blackcurrant, blackberry, fennel, and sea buckthorn. So they all have their different properties. Seaweed is a great flavour. It's different. If you're brave enough to try it, then definitely. I mean, it's made with organic dulse and sea greens, all of which are from Cornwall. So, as much as possible, the ingredients that we add are sourced locally or definitely within the UK.
Can I ask about the seaweed? Because to me, I think I would imagine seaweed would bring umami, great, but also a kind of fish kind of element.
I don't know. Well, the dulse is quite a specific seaweed place. It has a real umami flavor to it, and it is um. So they it has. I don't know. I don't quite understand how the comparison exists. That it's sometimes compared to bacon because it's nothing like bacon, is it? I mean, it's dulse. It's a seaweed flake. How could you compare that to bacon? But it's quite specific. I think also what happens with the hint of seaweed, it changes over the season. So we have an apple that we use towards the end of the season called Long Keeper that is really lovely and vibrant. And for raspberry and blackcurrant, it's really zingy because the color changes. So it's not a dark apple, it's a pale apple, and it doesn't oxidize. Like some apples, when you cook with them, they go brown really quickly. It doesn't. So it's almost like fluorescent. It's a really lovely color. And that sometimes combined with the seaweed at the end of the season gives it a whole other element. So that is the thing that the flavors won't always be the same because the apple's not always the same. So it changes with the seasons. And as we talked about earlier, we do use cooking apples because they still have a really nice flavor to them, but it almost gives it a sweet and a tart flavor, which those things combined with seaweed, I think gives you a great taste sensation.
Mm, amazing. Julie, thank you so much.
Pleasure. Thank you.